Dr. Julie Smith, it is so lovely to meet you in person because we've been in contact with each other even before your first book.
Yeah. I sort of was drawn to you almost straight away when I saw your work and found so much value in it straight away. And actually read your Grief Works book, which I just loved and then continue to recommend to everybody. So it's been really special to come meet you in person.
It is really lovely. So you're 40 with 3 children. And you had this enormous success with your first book, Why Has No One Told Me About This Before, which sold over 1 million copies.
Yeah.
It was in the bestseller list for 2 years. And actually, I'd love to talk to you about how that impacted you psychologically, having such a big reception changes one's sense of oneself internally. But the first question I ask all my guests is a version of, what is a particular challenge you have faced or are facing?
Yeah, so I guess my particular challenge this past year has been my cancer diagnosis and treatment.
Which is a big thing.
Yeah, it's been huge. And actually, I guess the spoiler is I'm okay now and I'm on the other side of treatment, which is fantastic. But I find that the way that I had to deal with it, being a parent and having a book that was due in at the same time, meant that I just got right into doing an action. And in some ways, I have felt the effects of that more recently. You know, I needed to get to the other side of treatment. I needed to get the book over the line. And now that that's happened, I think probably the last few weeks or so, I've really sort of felt that, oh, what just happened this last year? And yeah, has some processing to do. But in terms of the, you know, from the beginning, the first book and everything, the whole thing has been a big thing to deal with because I didn't have any ambitions to be a public person. I always talk about being, you know, very introvert, and I was a shy kid, and it was a big deal for me to even do clinical training, really. And that taught me a lot about sort of communication and being in the room with people, and I learned to really love it. And I was really comfortable with that, one person in a room, getting to know them really well and connecting and having a balanced life as well. Once I realised I couldn't carry on with my NHS work once I had 2 of my now 3 children, because I just couldn't do it all, not well anyway. And so I thought, if I do private work, then I can do that within the school hours and I can manage it around the children, that sort of thing. So there was a time where I had a really sort of balanced life, and then had this bright idea to share some of the sort of educational stuff online and put it out there for free. And yeah, within a few weeks, every video was just getting more and more views than the last one. And then lockdown happened and it took off like a rocket, and I was just sort of holding on for dear life, really. And we went at that in a really unsustainable way because we felt like it could end at any point. So in a couple of months, people will lose interest and it will all be over. So it's sort of, let's just do this while people are listening. Let's give them as much as we can. But it just didn't stop. It just kept going. And then the book did the same. From what I hear, people were buying the book, finding it helpful, and then buying copies for friends and family. And I met someone at my son's school recently, a grandmother, one of his classmates, who had found the book helpful, and then the following Christmas everyone in her family had received a copy and things like that. So I think that's really what happened with Why Has Nobody Told Me This Before?
So you were saying that it was word of mouth, but it was fast word of mouth because it kept on turning. And I guess what I'm trying to kind of configure for you is how, as someone who's introverted, who wanted to a great extent a quiet life, who wanted to have agency about your time, you know, seeing clients in the room, and then what felt like a good idea exploded and became a big idea that in some ways ran you. And so it feels like the work for you has been to swallow your own medicine, but also to figure out, do I let it run me or do I take agency? And I imagine your cancer diagnosis was a kind of stop and think moment. Although what you said about cancer, and I'm sure people listening will agree, is that often you have the treatment and the diagnosis and the operation that gives you a structure, and actually the psychological work you have the shock, but then the psychological work nearly always comes after.
Yeah.
Because you have this end point that you're heading for. And all the people I've worked with cancer have had to do the kind of loss work, because grief, it's a grief, isn't it? Loss begins at the point of diagnosis.
Yeah, and I think there's this loss of a degree of complacency that, even though throughout my adult life I was just as worried as anybody else at the prospect of getting something like cancer, but there was definitely a sense of distance from it, that there wasn't
Happened to other people.
Yeah. And so even though there's always that thought of, I hope I haven't, got that, it now has a sense of immediacy and closeness that it didn't before.
And does that bring with it all dangers? Because I think often when you've really suffered and you have your mortality threatened, which you did, everything feels a bit more scary. Crossing the road, going on a car journey, the children. Has it upped your sense of anxiety and threat?
Yeah, because it's like a huge sort of, magnifying glass to the value of everything and the simplicity of that value. It takes me back to that sort of moment really of diagnosis, and I sort of walk into the room. As consultant sat there with a Macmillan nurse next to, and I had told my husband not to come with me because our son was poorly at the time. And I said, well, you take him to the GP, I'll go and get this sorted. I'd had lumps and bumps before that turned out to be nothing, and it was all fine. So I sort of assumed it was going to be like that. But my husband said, no, I'll come. And that moment you see the Macmillan nurse there and the consultant's looking at you sort of with a sad face.
You can read it.
That rush of adrenaline. I just remember that sort of like an electric shock going through my body as he's trying to talk to me. And I remember hearing about people say, I can't remember what he said. And it's because all of this adrenaline is shooting through your body and you're just thinking, what are you about to tell me? And then the children. I
can see you just thinking about the children.
Yeah, that's the first bit that you go straight to. And I remember after, I think in the room, I was almost in business mode, like work mode. Okay, so what's the deal? What does this mean? What do we have to do next?
Steps. Yeah.
Let's do it. Boom, boom, boom.
And action, it wasn't like you talk about in your books. Like, what's the next best thing to do? Yeah.
Let's get this sorted. Go, go, go. And then we sort of we had some time. You have to go in for lots more tests that day and everything else. So you still don't really have all the answers. There's this huge period of uncertainty. Are we going to test for this, test for that? Has it spread? All those kind of things. And we had this sort of period of time where we were able to go outside and just catch a breather.
Thank God he came with you.
Yeah. And he's amazing.
Yeah.
And that's where, with the book, calling it Open When was really based on the idea of those moments when you just need a good talking to. You need someone who just seems to bring the right words all the time. And for me, he is that person. Definitely.
So your voice in the book is also his voice in you.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, absolutely.
You teach each other in a way.
Yeah, you learn from each other, don't you? And we're very different. He's the extrovert, he's the super optimist, the risk taker, the entrepreneur, and the let's go for it. And I'm probably the opposite to that in many ways. So we really balance each other out. And so that's when you realise, your internal dialogue isn't only made up of the voices you heard as a child, but the ones you hear every day as an adult. And I really recognise when we were sort of coming up with the idea for this book that he was that for me. And even when, a little shy sort of introvert me would come into London and I'd do sort of live TV or something like that. And it was all fine. But then I would essentially go home and just feel depleted and sometimes just needing a bit of a cuddle reboot. And a cry.
Yeah.
What did I just go through? And he was that person for me. And I'd realised, gosh, not everybody has that person. Or even if you do, they're not there all the time. And sometimes, I don't think he even realises he does that for me, but it would just be a few words or a slight shift of the trajectory of your attention. Yeah. That just allows you to turn a little bit to something that helps.
So if we go back to that day and he was outside in the car park with you, taking a breath, his response was...
He just held me tight, and it was, he was bringing his optimism that together we're pretty unstoppable and we are going to fight as strong as anyone has ever fighted for anything. We'll do this. Well, it was very...
we can get through this.
Yeah, like a coach, like an elite athlete's sports coach, that, okay, here's the problem. We are really capable of getting through this. Here's what we're going to do. Boom, boom, boom. We're going to find out everything we need to find out. We're going to do everything we need to do, and we're doing it together. And yeah, I really sort of felt that all the way through.
And in some ways, in your books and in yourself, it's doing it together, isn't it? Because, that African proverb, go fast, go alone, go far, go together. And that idea that you with him, one and one make three, that you could really kind of accompany each other through the pain of this. But I imagine both of you telling your children and deciding whether you're going to tell the children. I mean, some people don't want to them. If the cancer isn't externally visible and the treatment, like the chemo, isn't going to make you ill, some people want to protect their children, but you made the decision to tell your children.
Yeah, I felt that at some point they would find out.
They'd overhear it.
Yeah. And my daughter's very astute. She's very aware and emotionally mature. And I knew that she would sense if something was wrong. She's 12. She knows if something's not quite right. And I wanted them to trust us. So we didn't tell them straight away. We thought, well, we will tell them when we know everything we need to know, what the plan is, that I'm going to be okay. Because that's the thing with this stuff, is you don't find out all in one go. You sort of find out, well, it's something that shouldn't be there, but now we need to test to see how far it's gone and what that means. And then the treatment may change, and the treatment did change. So we waited until we knew exactly what was going to happen, when it was going to happen, how long it would take me to recover, and those sorts of things. And then we actually went away. We had a holiday booked anyway, as luck would have it. And the operation got booked in for just after. So while we were away, we just kind of dropped it into conversation. And
so it wasn't like, sit down, children, we've got something important to say.
No, we were in the car, actually, on our way to a water park in Florida. And so my son had a major operation when he was about 2.5 at Great Ormond Street. And we've always sort of talked about that with the children. So we said, well, Mummy's got to have an operation, because if she doesn't, then it will turn into something nasty. But it's not as bad as what Luke went through. And that comparison seemed to just really reassure all of them. Well, Luke's here, he's fine. So Mummy will be fine too. And my older daughter, Sienna, had a few more questions than the boys. My youngest was sort of, okay, great, pass the Lego. Let's carry on.
When are we going to get to the park?
Yeah. But my daughter was a bit more sort of, brought a few questions later on. But generally they were good. They were okay. Because we were lucky enough to be able to reassure them that we knew it was going to be all right. Yeah. So, yeah.
And you used the word cancer.
Yeah. And I was worried about that because I wasn't sure how much they had heard that word, what they had associated it with. Because I think when we were kids, we associated that word with death. And now it's not really that way. Lots of people go through treatment and come out the other side okay. And so, yeah, that did worry me about using that word. Oh, did we use the word? I think we said, because actually it was stage 0, so we'd caught it super as early as you can.
Oh, gosh.
And so the cells are essentially pre-cancer cells that need to come out within sort of a year or so. So that helped as well, because we were able to say, if it doesn't come out, then it will turn into something nasty. So, yeah, we were in the best possible position that anyone in that situation could be in, really. Yeah.
Thank goodness.
Yeah.
And I guess where that takes me, and as all therapists, I can't help but do that, is sort of take you back to your beginnings and your parenting, how that influences you and the path that you chose to be a psychologist. Tell me a bit about your childhood and your parents.
Yeah, so both my parents grew up with very little. My dad especially, he grew up in abject poverty. He grew up hungry. He had to wear shorts all year round because
Oh my God.
there was no prospect
Cold.
of buying trousers, that kind of poverty. And parents who were not very loving either. They were very, very Victorian and didn't have a great time. And it's, it's almost a miracle that he is the person he is now, given the sort of experiences he had growing up. He's a family man. He's someone who will always be there. I could call him in the middle of the night, it wouldn't matter. And he worked really hard to ensure that we had more than he had.
So that was a huge role model.
Yeah, absolutely.
But when you say not very loving, I think we forget is the socioeconomic position. In some ways, having the capacity to love requires the basic needs to be met, that you're not frightened, you're not cold, you're not hungry. Because when those needs aren't met, you don't really have the luxury to love. You can be kind of okay with each other.
Yeah.
But really to love, we need to feel safe.
Yeah.
Safe in our bodies, safe around our kitchen table.
Yeah.
And I think often we judge people for things that it wasn't within their gift to be able to give us.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's very much the case for probably that scenario.
But he changed.
Yes, so he left home as soon as he possibly could because it wasn't a nice place to be. I mean, he met my mum who had a family life, and I think he very much wanted to be a part of that. And it was this new thing that he hadn't experienced. The family would get together and have a nice time and things. And
so that was new to him.
Yeah.
That happens quite often in couples, isn't it? I want what she or he's got because I haven't had it myself.
Yeah, and I think my mum was probably stability for him as well, where he was probably a bit more of a wild one where he had no boundaries or guidance. Perhaps my mum's sort of more withdrawn, anxious, shy side balanced him out a little bit. And they worked really hard to keep a roof over our heads and feed us all. I mean, there was a time when my dad was working 7 days a week as a mechanic, and then he was cleaning offices in the evening into the night because the interest rates went really, really high in the 80s and stuff. So they just worked their socks off so that we could have stability and safety and things. So, which we had, always had shoes on my feet and dinner on the table and stuff like that. So yeah, I'm super lucky. And they're still around and still super helpful with my own children, and which I'm really grateful for.
So they role model something for you that you have kind of lived out. Mm-hmm. But I guess also, is that the influence that you wanted to transmit what you'd learned to people who can't afford therapy? Is it your father's courage without the knowledge and instinct that got him to then be stable and offer you an education and stability that you don't have? But do you think that shaped you to want to, what felt like a small good idea? Do you think that was the unseen part, that I want other people to have what I've had?
Possibly. I mean, I have these memories as a child of laying in bed. We lived in Wiltshire back then, and I would lay in bed awake at night in the winter if it was sort of windy or raining and things like that. And I would worry about the animals that lived outside and whether they were freezing cold and whether they would survive and what that would be like to live like that. And it's almost a sort of overemphasized compassion and empathy that was probably taken too far because it was keeping me up at night for something that I couldn't control. Or I would see something on the news about, children across the world and worry about them. Yeah. So I was always sort of concerned about suffering. But I guess sort of studying wise, the reason I got into psychology was a fascination for people. I think I read ferociously as a child. I never read fantasy or anything like that. It was always stories about kind of real life and the simplicity of kind of relationships in real life and things like that. And so I had this sort of fascination about people, and combined with this sort of magnified empathy for distress. And the two combined, really. So once I had these skills and I had something to share, and I could see in the therapy room, my gosh, this is making a difference. These people are using this stuff to change their lives. Why have people got to pay to come and see someone like me to find out
basics?
What's not rocket science? Yeah. So, I used to sort of give poor Matthew a headache saying, this should be available. And then he said, well, go on then, make it available and let's make some YouTube videos or something. And then the rest happened.
So are you in the stories? So I was thinking about imposter syndrome, and I was wondering, the speed of your success and your capacity to integrate that as I am worthy of this. I am, this is true for me. This is authentically true for me. I was wondering if you were thrown by it and if you felt that there were aspects of the book that you were writing for yourself as well as for everybody else.
Oh, yeah. I mean, as I write the books, even with this one, I sort of learn as I go.
Writing books teach you, don't they?
Yeah, I didn't even write the books in order because I sort of picked a chapter that I wanted to focus on right now and sat there with all the research and read around it and things like that. And that's really the point of it, is that it's not clinical stuff. It's real life scenarios that we all face at some point, including me. But they're the kind of things that leave you confused, filled with emotion that you don't know what to do with, and sort of unsure about which way is up and which direction to face in. And when I talked about how Matthew was often that voice for me where he would just shift my attention in the right way when I was sort of in the eye of the storm. And I think I do the same for him and have done that for people, in therapy and things. It was a sort of, there has to be a way of doing this for people outside of that. And I guess the tricky part with the social media videos is there's no sort of order or coherence to it all. It's sort of random videos on random days. And
that's like me with my Monday top tips. It depends what's come into my mind that day, basically. Often from the therapy room, actually.
So it's so nice with a book, isn't it, to sort of put it into a
coherent.
So that people can, fold a page and come back tomorrow and keep it there.
If I bite-size the book, and it's a wonderful book, I really recommend it. And of course, it went in at #1 in the Sunday Times bestsellers. Many congratulations. Quite a bit of envy as well. So you write to the reader, you write them a letter. So open when I feel stressed, or open when my friends are being horrible, or I have imposter syndrome. And you write them a letter. And I think the first kind of thing is you want them to have metacognition. You want them to be able to think about their thinking.
Yeah.
Because from that step, when you can get outside of yourself and become aware of all of your competing thoughts, being aware of your emotions, you then have more capacity to choose.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of your messages, we can choose a lot more about the choices we make in the next steps than we give ourselves credit for. And that where we put our attention, and if we choose where we put our attention, that's where we get our outcome.
Yeah, I think attention is a huge part of it. And when you learn that that's a spotlight that you can steer, no matter how many, actors are on the stage in terms of kind of thoughts and emotions, it gives you such a sense of agency that shifts how you feel about the whole situation. Even though the situation is still the same, you don't have to solve the problem to, take the whole cancer thing over the summer. When I got diagnosed, I was a week away from handing the book in. And I was at that stage, I was reading through, editing and stuff like that. So I think it was a day after or 2 days after the diagnosis, I thought, I just need to get this off my desk so that I can focus. But I had a few more chapters to read through. And I just happened to be reading through the chapter on when fear shows up. And
so interesting, isn't it?
I just thought, this isn't what I need to hear, actually. And I pressed delete and I rewrote the whole thing there and then. And it wasn't anything different about fear, but it was a different approach. I needed this here's where you are. You're not responsible for the fear arriving, but you can use it to your advantage. And it's your responsibility to sort of cultivate the courage to move through this. So the chapter on fear is very, like I said about the coach idea, is very straight down the line. It's
remind me what the message is with the fear. Fear is important because it kind of sets up a red flag, danger ahead. So we need it.
And that's really what it's saying, is the job here is not to get rid of the fear. It's to use it to your advantage. And it's allowing you to bring your A game. So use it when your fear says something, do something about it. So it's really turning, there's stuff in there about not wanting to be the prey, but to be the predator. And this idea that I felt like a rabbit in headlights for a minute there, where, this thing is apparently attacking me. And I'd completely turned that around in that moment. I said, well, no, I'm attacking it. It better be scared because I'm coming for it. And that felt fundamentally different to being on the back foot.
It gives you
I
power.
wanted to be on the front foot. Yeah, yeah. And that was just in words, I was still in the same position, but I felt fundamentally different. And then I got into action, actually. My husband and I started ringing around for second opinions and people to talk to about treatment options and all this kind of thing. And that helped. It helped hugely, but it was just words, which is...
But words bring emotions.
Yeah.
And then it's a cycle, isn't it? There's this, what we say to ourselves and what we listen within ourselves, and actually what we hear from others has a massive impact on our capacity to deal with difficulty. And people deal with difficulty at different degrees every single day.
Yeah.
But, we interviewed Miranda Hart the other day, and it is often the small daily choices that you make that in the end affects your long-term outcome, isn't it? There's very rarely a big transformational, my attitude to cancer is going to be like this and that's going to fix it, because all through your treatment journey, you had to make small decisions like, when am I going to tell the children? How am I going to show up today?
Yeah.
How am I going to deal pre-op? How am I going to deal post-op?
Yeah. I think all the way along, it was holding that value of courage and always choosing the option that I would feel proud of later.
What does that mean?
Not giving in to that natural urge to hide, withdraw, escape, avoid, front foot, move forward, see you on the other side of this when things will be better, getting into action, all of that stuff.
If I was your therapist, I would say that you probably need both, no? That because of your bias and your first response is to retreat, withdraw and hide, you probably need to do that.
Yeah.
And then take a beat and a breath.
Yeah.
And then move forward. You can't ignore your first response, can you?
Yeah. And there was a bit of that, actually, especially because the children didn't know at that point. In the house, it was just Matthew and I that knew. And so there were sort of some dark moments of feeling like you're kind of spinning out almost of what's going on and how is this happening, and really not having the energy to kind of see people. I found it really difficult at that point where we weren't ready to share. I found it really difficult to be around people because I think, because I don't really have a front. I'm pretty
open.
Yeah. And
so you couldn't put on your I'm okay game face.
I find that really difficult. I think I did it, but I found it really exhausting. So
you're a real introvert, aren't you?
Yeah. Even doing things like the school run and stuff like that. I would see all these lovely parents that are in our community that I really like. And I knew that I didn't want the children to find out from anyone else first. But I knew there was probably a genuine risk of me saying it to someone. If, someone said, "How are you?" too nicely, I might go, I'm not okay. So, that was a sort of a tiring time, I think.
And now you're out in the world. The book is out in the world. How's that changed you? Because you said you've got the space now to process. Where are you at? What's changed?
Yeah, it's been a sort of strange couple of weeks, really, because we were working so hard in the lead up to it. And it was sort of really different to the first time. I think the first time round, it was my first book. I had no concept of what success would even be measured by, or what that would look like, or how many books you need to sell, or that kind of thing. I had no idea, really.
I read the other day that if you sell more than 5,000 books, publishers think of it as a success.
Yeah. I think it's sort of something like 90-something% of books sell under 5,000 copies. And I never sort of once in that first book coming out gave myself the chance to sort of really think about bestseller lists or anything like that. I was very sort of boundaried with it. I felt so lucky to be in that position. I was such a bookie growing up. I thought, oh my goodness, I've got to go to the Penguin Random House building and publish a book.
That.
How lucky am I? And I didn't want to ruin that experience by worrying about how successful it was. Yeah. And so it all felt it was just a lovely surprise in some ways. Although we worked hard for it, it was a lovely surprise and unexpected. Whereas this time round, I felt like everyone I knew was sort of going, is it number one yet? You know, there's
The
the expectation
expectation
of everybody else around that makes it feel as though if you don't, will everybody look at you as, well, this time you failed.
Yeah.
So it was a really different experience this time. So yeah, weirdly, it wasn't sort of elation when it did well. I wouldn't say I felt excited and elated. I felt relieved. And I really sort of
And now?
apply that to, you know, when you think of people in the public eye or, you know, athletes or anyone who's doing something well, all that happens is everyone's expectations shift up, probably including their own, and how difficult that must be, that sort of pressure. You know, this is small fry compared to lots of people and what they're dealing with. It's kind of an interesting learning experience, really.
It's what's that phrase what's it called? Where you think, when I'm going to get to that first £1 million, then you get to the £1 million and you revert back to how you were before. There's a phrase for it. Can't think what it is. But just that with internal expectation changes with your experience of it, and you go back to your basic sense of sort of self very quickly.
Yeah, yeah. I think you almost fantasize, don't you, about the big emotional moment when you find out and what that would be like. And it doesn't really happen. And you've already habituated to the whole thing, and you're already, okay, we did it. And what about next week? And you're already shifting that goal back to the next thing and the next thing and the next thing.
And then you don't really enjoy the moment, or it steals the moment from you.
Yeah. It's so I think I have to keep checking myself and bring myself back to what a cool experience. I mean, I was doing the Virgin Radio this morning, and I was speaking to Matt this morning, saying, I haven't done anything like this for a while. I'm super nervous. I want to get it right. And Matt just said, what a cool experience, though. You know, you'll be able to look back and say, I did that once. And
Chris Evans.
It's fun. And he just reframed it in the moment. You know, when you're kind of in it, and, you know, that's the whole idea of this book, is when you're in it, it's really hard to find the words you need to hear at that time. You just need someone to shift that trajectory slightly of your attention so you can go for it. And that's what happened this morning, really. And all of these things, like coming to see you, I could be sat here with massive imposter syndrome right now, but actually, what a lovely experience to have had the opportunity.
So what has changed for you, and what have you learned from both the positive experiences of your great success and from your diagnosis?
I think it always comes back to the one thing that's sort of been at the core of everything and helped me through it all the way along, has been the recognition of my own values and holding that tight all the way along. It's wonderful that all this has happened, but I was so glad that it happened to me a little bit later in life, when I already had a career that I liked and valued. I already had a good marriage, 3 beautiful children, a life that I liked. It helped to protect me against the kind of the potential BS of it all. Yes. And I wasn't laying my self-esteem on likes or views, or I think people would probably be surprised that I don't even really look at all that. I don't even post it. We film it, and then Matthew edits and posts and looks at analytics and things like that. And he probably gets frustrated when he's trying to tell me, and I've left it behind.
It's not where your interest is.
No. And that really helps me a lot.
And your core values, what can you name them?
Something I valued hugely from my own childhood was that my mum was always present, that she was there when I got home from school. And
your mum didn't work?
She worked in school hours, so she did like dinner ladying and things like that, or she worked nights stacking shelves in supermarkets and things. So she was really present, really there and available. And I recognised how important that was, actually. There's a boy I knew, he lived over the road, and just through circumstance, his mum was a single parent. She had to work all the time, and he would go home to an empty house, and it was difficult for him. And so I always valued that, and I didn't. So all these wonderful things were happening that were really difficult to say no to, and I didn't want to let myself be whisked away by how fancy everything seemed. I knew that my role as a parent was the most important thing to me, and that
was your priority.
Yeah. However wonderful all of these things were that were happening, I didn't want the children to suffer. And And in some ways that made the situation harder because I would do silly things like get up at 5 a.m. to film rather than it encroach on the children's day, or for me to be absent during the day, or we'd stay up really late at night and that kind of thing. And we still do that to a degree. We film after the children are in bed and things like that. And so we lose sleep over it. What mattered is that we were still going to be good parents that were there and doing the things that we were doing before. So that value system and the recognition of what mattered helped me to stay grounded with it all, and also made it easier to say no to things if it didn't fit, so
boundaries.
Yeah. Like I said, oh yeah, we'll come over to America and do some stuff for the book, that's great, but I'm only coming if I can bring the children. And rather than mum being absent all the time, it's, we're going to do this is going to be our adventure together, and we're going to make it worthwhile for all of us. So that's really helped. And it just keeps reminding me, I think when you're pulled away from your values, it reminds you what they are, doesn't it? Because life does that. We don't intend it to happen, but when life pulls us away from the things that matter to us most, we just feel that. And
there's a physical feeling, isn't there?
Yeah.
A sort of discomfort inside, a kind of tearing inside.
Yeah, and I find that was often a sort of common reason that people would come along to therapy saying, I'm not really sure what the problem is. Everything just feels pointless, or that kind of thing. And often once people then got clear on what their values were and could see how certain things in life had pulled them away from it, everything became clearer, and they were able to kind of turn around certain things or reprioritize or reevaluate certain things. And it's a constant pull. There's no perfect way of doing it. I like this idea of, balance not being a sweet spot that you never move from. It's a constant shifting.
Adaptability.
Yeah. It's just the awareness of when you're moving too far in one direction, you just readjust and you come back. And so it's a constant sort of like that, really.
I can see that you move and you come back. But as I'm understanding you, your values are kind of foundational stones that influence both your belief and your behavior and your view on the world. And once you're clear that, in a way, love is my priority, loving my kids, being in relationship with Matthew, and there's probably an outer circle of your close family and your friends.
Yeah.
If that's the priority, then it makes decision-making quite simple.
Oh, yeah. It makes all of those decisions about opportunities or things like that easier to be guided by. Because if it's in the wrong direction, then it just doesn't feel right. Like the idea of doing a tour, for example, I thought, I can't be away for a month or 2 months, but equally I can't be going up and down the country at the moment because just the stages the children are at and how important it seems to be for me to pick them up from school and things like that. So, yeah.
I'm sitting here thinking she's so kind of good and she's got it. When are you impossible? When are you difficult? Because it feels so clear and sorted. When are you bonkers?
I think in trying to balance all of that, because that stuff's so important to me, and yet what a fantastic set of opportunities that you can't say no to, the tendency for me is to try and do more than I can. So Matthew still works full time at his own work. So essentially what we're doing is still just us. So
you do a bit what your dad did. You're doing 3 jobs, right?
Yeah. I understand that this is a good thing for the children as well. The kind of opportunities it gives us as a family and the choices it gives us as a family and the stability.
But what do you do when you're tricky? Do you lose your temper? Do you shut down? Do you act out?
I think I probably overwork and underrest, and then everybody suffers the consequences of that, don't they? Because I'm trying to do everything for everyone and it not be too disruptive for anyone except for me. That's probably my
fault line.
Yeah.
And then you're more short-tempered and you're not patient.
Yeah, or just start resenting it all and thinking, everyone go away because I need a rest. That sort of and it makes it feel unsustainable then, doesn't it? Because you're just exhausted. But
exhaustion is a big thing. You talk about that a lot in the book. Should we unpick exhaustion a bit psychologically? Because also the other thing I feel is like when I'm told I need to sleep 8 hours a night and I'm getting 6, I somehow then get more stressed about my sleep rather than feeling I'll get my sleep when I need to get my sleep.
Yeah, I know. And working parents laugh at, you remember those I say you remember those, they're around everywhere, but the signs on the road that say don't drive tired. I just think, well, that
Never
puts all
drive.
parents off the road, doesn't it? You know, I would never drive if I wasn't driving tired. And yeah, and I think a lot of the stuff that goes on social media doesn't account for real life either, does it? This sort of, make sure you get 8 hours, but join the 5 a.m. club. And it's all, hang on a minute, how early do I have to go to bed? Even my children aren't in bed that early. And a lot of it is
unrealistic.
You can't, no, it's not achievable. And then you feel like, oh, I'm not doing this right. And also for me, where, I'm preaching a lot of this stuff, look after yourself, do all these things. And yet to be able to put all this free content out there, I have to pay a price for that also, I think we have a bit more of a balance now because it's easier. Back then when we thought this is all going to stop in a minute,
you didn't have the financial security you have now.
Yeah. And now that we know it's not necessarily going to all disappear tomorrow, we can say, do you know what? Let's only film on a Friday night or a Saturday night when we know you haven't got the pressure of a day of work the next day. And so we'll script in the week and then we'll film at the weekend or something like that. And so we're producing less, but being able to tolerate that, I think.
Because Julia Bradbury, did you follow her? Because she got breast cancer.
Yeah.
And she's now on this mission with her wonderful book. We interviewed her about health. And it's her focus of cold water swimming and exercise and stretch and weights. And I wondered, did you get a kind of a reboot of, oh my God, I have to make sure I go to the gym more. Was that what, or did you ask yourself, why have I got cancer? Is it because I was too stressed, I didn't sleep enough?
Yeah, I think there's this weird thing where at the beginning, you have this sort of why me sense of, I've always tried to be healthy, no drinking, smoking, drugs, anything. Like I've always tried my best. So why has that happened? And then equally, you get this why me on the other side. So when your oncologist says, go live your best life, goodbye, you think, well, what have I done to deserve that? All those people that are fighting for their lives in there, how have I got? So there's a weird sort of why me at each end. Yeah. And yeah, there was definitely a look, I bought a few books and things like that where I was going to look at, okay, all this kind of, is there anything I can do to prevent that happening in the future? Yeah. And so there is definitely a concentration on that stuff. But then I think more recently with the book coming out and everything, it was another busy time. And those health behaviours fall off again. The sort of exercise, well, that feels like the negotiable thing to do in a day when you've got other things that have deadlines, or so life begins to happen again. And so I don't know what the answer is really, and I think I'm still working all that out. I don't know if anyone in the comments has any answers to this. Oh yeah,
I think we're always working it out, but you work it out with a clarity that really helps other people. I was wondering, is there a final kind of thought you can give listeners that is in open when, but is kind of prescient now?
Yeah, I think something I mentioned at the beginning of the book actually is that any time that you're struggling, the best thing for our nervous systems is each other. And so I would always recommend people to reach out to another person and connect with someone you trust with anytime when you're struggling with anything, however small or severe.
People need people.
Yeah. But there are inevitably those moments when you don't have that. And that's when books, whether it's mine or somebody else's, that's when books are just worth their weight in gold. And I have no doubt that people have had that sense of value from your books too. And when I'm often recommending grief works to people and things like that, it's because sometimes it can be one sentence that just shifts that for you in the moment. And I always think of that sort of, if you shift the trajectory of something that's moving in a straight line, over time that makes a big old difference. So books are not the whole answer. People are generally number one, but when people can't be there all the time, books are a really good way forward.
I think that's really true. And what I heard with my books, which is very touching, and I know you heard with your books, is that we need people more than we need books, and we need the connection and the relationship. But it requires effort.
Yeah.
Emotional, psychological effort. And also it requires courage to ask, to reach out, to be with. And I think there's something incredibly stabilizing about having a book that you keep in your handbag or your backpack or by your bed, which is what people have said to both of us, where you can just privately, in the intimacy of your own misery, turn to a page. And if you can then turn to a page and you see a version of yourself in those pages, and it lets you recognize I am anormal, suffering, everybody suffers. And how I can think about this, as you said, is that slightly 5 degrees difference. Then you've already wound down your nervous system. You're already in a different psychological landscape.
Yeah.
And then you can make better decisions about what you do next or how you are, even if it's just, I'm going to go to sleep now.
Yeah, and I recognise I did that all through my life. Being drawn to books, whether it's fiction or non, was about, you know, difficult moments and finding something or seeing something in a story or a non-fiction book that helped me in that way. Because I'm one of those people that I don't reach out to people. I have that kind of shyness and that withdrawn sense. So reading would be my sanctuary. Reading and writing, actually. I would read a lot before I knew it was a thing. Do kind of almost expressive writing. You know, the only time I'd keep a journal was when I was struggling with something, and it would help me make sense of stuff. So it's all words, though, isn't it? It's language that just helps us understand things and frame things, and inevitably then helps us through it.
Yeah, and the words you choose, Julie, are very profound, and the story you help people tell themselves is a story that will help change their lives. So I'm very grateful to you for the work you've done, but also coming here today.
Thank you. Thanks so much. It's a massive privilege to be here. I can't tell you how excited I am about it.
It's a really lovely to meet you. Hello, Emily and Sophie. Very exciting to be on season 8 of the Therapy Works podcast and to talk about the amazing Julie Smith. It's such a lovely conversation, and I wonder what your thoughts are.
Yes, it was such a lovely conversation, and I sort of thought in lots of ways you and her have a lot of things that are kind of aligned in terms of thinking about how do you make some stuff that's sort of maybe thought of as sort of separate therapy world stuff really more accessible and more mainstream, and to have kind of those voices heard.
Can I just come in there? She does it to millions. I
didn't say your influence was the same. I said your mission was aligned. But fair point.
She does it with massive impact. I looked at the bestseller list, which always slightly kills me, I've got to say. And her first book is number 9. And her new book is like number 4. So they're both still on the bestseller list.
Right. But her new book is a lot about the power of reframing. So how could you reframe that, Mum?
I tell you, I can totally reframe it. So I can step away from my own sibling rivalry, which has been a terrible and a brilliant force in my life.
Yeah.
And step away and look at her, that she is the most amazing woman with wonderful messages to give out into the world. And so the more hands that book gets into, the better for everybody. And I genuinely believe that.
No, absolutely. I agree. And actually, your book was also very successful in its own way. But, you know, I do think that reframing can be really, really powerful. And it's obviously incredible if you have a relationship, a person to help you reframe. But if you're not, the books really are a lifeline, aren't they? They really, really are. And it could just be sort of one thing that someone says and it can stick in your mind and you can kind of hold on to it. I had like a quite comedy version of that where I think like lots of women, sometimes I have like moments of finding it hard to just sort of ask for what I want or ask for what I need or kind of, expressing my own needs. And a couple of years ago, I got a bike that had 2 child seats on the back. And I hadn't cycled for a long time. And I was very, very nervous about cycling around Bath with my extremely young children on the back. And so I did this like super geeky thing. All right, I found a teacher that like teaches children how to ride a bike. And I booked like a private lesson with him. And we went to a school car park, and I was there, my bike with my helmet on. And he was sort
looking
of,
about 8.
Looking about 8, and we were sort of practicing stopping and starting, turning around.
Sweet.
And he made me, I had like a high-vis, she made me wear like a high-vis jacket, even though we were just in the car park. This does have a point.
Okay.
And he sort of said something to me, which was obviously very much about road safety, but it really sort of stuck with me. And he said, so when you are cycling on the road, it's actually much safer to not squish yourself into the gutter, to take up space more towards the centre of the road, because obviously people can see you better and they have to move around you and people have to be more careful. So obviously it was a road safety frame.
It's a very nice metaphor.
It's actually safer to take up more space. It's easier for the people around you. You get your needs better. And there was something just about like the little phrase of reframing how I kind of thought about taking up space that I carried with me ever since my very geeky bicycle lesson.
I think I really need that bicycle lesson.
Metaphorically,
perhaps, but also literally. But also, funny enough, I thought of you, Em, a bit when she was talking about books. And sometimes we are too scared to turn to people yet. And books, we can have a sort of safe relationship. And people aren't always there, but you can always pick up your book. There's a kind of stepping stone, isn't there, of relationship that you have with the person that's written. You have that book by your bed, you can take it with you, you can carry it around. There's a sort of relational aspect emotionally, as well as just learning interesting stuff from a book. And so much
easier to trust a book, isn't it? Because it doesn't ask anything of you.
Yeah, and you get to take it in your own time, process it at your own speed. You have a lot of control. But also there's sort of refuges for so many people, aren't there? That's why I thought of you, Emma. You were someone who definitely turned to books as a kid when you were feeling overwhelmed. And my eldest, if she's angry, she'll like storm up to her bedroom, slam the door, pick up a book. Because like, I'll go in this world. Thank you very much. Not other than this one. Yeah, they're powerful tools of transformation, aren't they?
Yes, and life-saving sometimes.
The other thing that I couldn't find the word for, which I know Sophie would have remembered, was the hedonic principle.
Oh yeah, I put anhedonic adaptation, ?
Yes.
In my notes.
It's so
You're going to
annoying
have to translate for me and the uneducated amongst us.
So if you do it, because I got caught up in a rubbishy expression then. So will you do it better for me now?
I think I learned it from you, Mum. The hedonic adaptation is the idea that we get used to our level of happiness. We sort of adapt into our reality such that we have a baseline level of well-being, that even when good things happen, then we sort of have a spike of happiness, like we bought a new house and it's really lovely, that most of the time then just adapt after a while to how happy we were before. So we think these things are going to transform our happiness levels, but really that's not true. But also it goes the other way, which is if we lose something that used to give us pleasure, then it can regain its value when we get it back. So that's anhedonic adaptation. So for example, in COVID, when we couldn't do a whole bunch of things, when we got them back, we were like, woohoo, this is so exciting. I can go out for dinner or see a friend. That's what I've understood it to mean.
That's exactly right.
I haven't gone and ever read anything about it, really.
Laurie Santos on her podcast talks about it. It's very good.
There you go. It'll be better than what I just said.
No, you said it perfectly. Having had such a stonking bestseller, the second book, you can never feel as excited or as surprised, or because you're sort of used to it, and it sets up your expectation that you're going to sell millions of books. So your kind of level of expectation and happiness then is shifted, and then it becomes as it was before it all happened.
The other thing that I thought when she was sort of, talking about her kind of gut reaction to getting a cancer diagnosis is that it's sort of almost impossible to practice what you preach in a time of crisis and a time where you're just in kind of survival mode. Like, survival mode is there for a purpose. And you can be Dr. Julie Smith and be really, really wise and have a lot of amazing tools and still go into survival mode. And I suppose it's just the sort of capacity to get out of it, and also the kind of self-compassion around it. So that when you do have moments where you want to hide or do the things that are not best for you, and having compassion about that. And I think there's a quote that's in the book that I really, really liked that was around self-compassion, which was, if you want a man to get up off the ground, you have to stop beating him. Like, I sort of thought that was a very succinct image of, you have to kind of care for yourself in order to be able to get up and keep going. And such a lovely book example that really, she clearly applies to her own life too.
Tangentially, I wondered, Mum, when she was talking about her values and the importance of her children and prioritising that, listening to that, I got, mum guilt, my own mother guilt. And then not long after that, you're like, so what happens? Do you blow up? Do you do anything wrong? And I was like, I wonder if Mum also got away with mum guilt. And then I was like, give me some relief here.
Because that was exactly it.
But like, you are horrible sometimes, right?
Yeah, please
come to my level.
Yeah.
And she didn't. I mean, she's gorgeous and she genuinely is exactly as she seems. But I wanted her dark side to match my dark side, and it wasn't going to happen.
Yeah, I was going to say, that's what it says more about us if there's anything about her.
Yeah, exactly.
It's that thing of like, and also that, motherhood guilt obviously is such a prevalent experience. And have you seen that comedy clip? I wish I can remember her name. It's sort of on Instagram, a lot of a woman pretending to present the news, and it said, women would like to just announce that they would just like everyone to fuck off.
Oh, yeah.
That one, anyone? Where sort of guilt for working too hard, guilt for not working hard enough, guilt for having children, guilt for not having children. It's not guilt, actually, I think, criticised or something. And it feels like that often with work, whether it's an internal voice or an external voice, of you work too much, you don't work enough, you don't.
The impossible balance.
The impossible balance. Say nothing new. But yeah.
Well, it's interesting.
But other women can spark that in us, can't it? Of like, you really prioritise your children.
Right. And yet, yes, and still manage to do all these other things.
Yes.
And the sort of also reality of you never really know what somebody else's internal world is like. Like, weird things about being a therapist is that your whole job is to really sort of think about this other person and what's going on for them, or what is it like to be them, and all the different factors that have gone into making them. But like, the ultimate reality is you never really know what it's like to be another person, however hard, and even when it's your entire job, basically, to try.
And I think that's true in our marriages, in our families, and in our close relationships, that we do really know each other, but at some level we can never fully know each other.
And I think there are little moments in a relationship that can shock us when that happens. Like, I remember when I told my husband that I was giving up meat, and he just had a little freak out because I hadn't really included him exactly. I hadn't really included him in my process of thinking about it. So it came out of the blue, and he was just like, it's just that you can have these whole processes that I don't know anything about, and then you just make a decision and change something. And it wasn't about the decision of giving up meat. It was just that shock moment of like, you're a whole other person, and I don't know everything that goes on for you. And we sort of forget that often, particularly with people we see all the time.
Right, and it's like a curiosity too. I often look at my children and I'm like, we sort of created you. Like, is that sort of completely mad saying like, we created you, but you're totally your own person. I don't really know what it's like to be you. And yes, I made you. I know it's like such an obvious thing to say, but it kind of boggles my mind.
Yeah.
Every time. It's like thinking about space. You're just like, oh no, I can't get my head around that. Too big.
Should we talk about values?
We've sort of zigged and zagged a bit in our conversation, but I think it's a question that I often get in my own practice. I think it's a question that we often get on our podcast, which is really around like how and when to tell children difficult news. And of course, it's really a personal thing, that decision, that different families will feel different things are right. But I think it's so true what Julie said around trust, and that your children most likely are going to find out at some point. And that firstly, if they find out not from you, that can really feel like a betrayal. And secondly, if you tell them, you also get the power to shape the narrative of what you tell them, instead of sort of them finding out from some other source in a way that you wouldn't want them to find out. And I think what she said was also really wise around, you don't have to give all the information in one go. That kind of like sort of drip feeding and taking your child's lead, and obviously depending on their age, often can sort of make it a bit more digestible.
Yeah,
children too.
Right.
Do you have anything to add to that, Cecile?
No, I really liked that it was in the car. It's so safe and containing and regulating, and you kind of, your mirror neurons are firing up. They were moving to something fun, like a water park or something. So I thought that was psychologically really took the danger out of it, and yet told them the truth, that they had time to process, and the eldest one could come back in her own time. I thought that was very clever. Cars are great vehicles for full conversations, they really are. But that's the whole point. Your dad and I, our fights are in cars.
There is no escape. You are having this conversation with me, my friend.
Like on the whole, that's probably good. But sometimes
you do want to stop. No, he did stop once and marched away, and I marched after him.
That's like that pillow you have. If you leave, I'm coming with you.
Yes.
You have a bed.
I'm not good at being left.
Oh no. And I feel like we were sort of quite light there, but honestly, talking to your children about things are hard and painful
and important. Yeah. And I really want to thank Julie for being so open and vulnerable with me, and so honest, and for writing 2 spectacular books and giving us her time. I really, really appreciate it. And thank you to everyone that's listening.